and it's, all very beautiful. But they kind of got you're the ballad band, and anything that they were prior to that, it was like it's forgotten.
Jace, you're saying this all right now. I'm reading the Jukebox Hero, the story of Lou Graham. I just bought it. I told you, I'm totally digging out. And when I dig into these guys, I dig in. And I'm reading his biography right now. And what you just said is 100% what happened, where they were saying when that record came out, they all of a sudden had to do a ballad for like we were talking about Night Ranger. They had to do a ballad for everyone. And that's why they split, because Lou Graham was getting forced to sing these ballads, which he didn't mind if it was one or two, but it was almost like the record company was pushing for, more, as much as they could possibly shell out. And he's like, no, I want to be a rocker. I want to, really rock out. And so he ended up quitting. He ended up splitting with Mick Jones. In fact, Mick Jones, in the book, it says that Mick Jones, they were having a problem with who gets the songwriting credit for "I Want to Know What Love Is," and they
And
couldn't
nobody
agree
wanted
on
it.
But
Nobody wanted it. Like, we don't want to take credit for that. You take it.
Mick wanted it. Mick wanted it, but Lou, I think it was like 60-40, Mick Jones. But Lou says, what about my, 40% or whatever? And, I think you only deserve this. And there was a big, big quarrel between the two of them about that song, which ultimately led to them leaving. So, or him, at least Lou leaving. But also now, you know what? I hope you don't mind me just really totally taking over your show right now.
Hey, man, this is what we're here for.
But listen, so Lou Graham ended up leaving to do a solo career. Remember, he did Midnight Blue. Yeah. So, he was actually competing with himself. So he's got a solo record out. And this is kind of interesting because if you think about Journey, this was really the demise of Steve Perry, where a lot of the, the negativity to Steve Perry, because Neil Schon went off and he did a solo record with Jan Hammer, but it was a jazz fusion kind of thing. They would never compete with Journey in the charts.
Right.
Whereas O'Sherry comes out and it's, hey, look who's number one, Steve Perry. Look who's number two, Journey. In the case of Foreigner, it's kind of the same thing. Midnight Blue was kind of, going up the charts along with, let's say, whatever the song, Say You Will, maybe, I don't know, whatever song. So he was kind of like in competition with himself. That makes sense?
It does.
Yeah.
So again, like the two of those bands, it's so interesting with the similarities, because you're right. Steve Perry is basically in some people's minds doing, Journey Light, but he is Journey. What do you mean? It's not Journey Light. Well, then why do you even have the solo stuff if it's going to be so similar? But
right.
To your point about Lou Graham, it's like, well, I want to do rock music again. I really want to be doing that kind of stuff because, man, his upper register, like when he's just going, it's just, when I was a kid, I was more initially drawn to Lou Graham because I felt he sounded, at that time period, the closest thing you had to Robert Plant. And I think that kind of gets lost in the I Want to Know What Love Is stuff. It's like, no. You go back and listen to, we'll use just Jukebox Hero. When he's really going, it's like, oh my gosh, like this guy has it all. And he can kind of float between head and chest and just really a technically gifted singer that in some ways, has kind of gotten, again, in the shadow of these other guys who either had bigger personalities or a bigger marketing machine behind them. That's ultimately what it comes down to. That's how we saw the change in the music industry becoming more and more commodity as soon as the record labels will start telling you, wow, we don't hear a hit. We need another ballad. That's kind of where we are now with music, which is so unfortunate, which is why there's so many independent artists who are like, hey, I have a platform. I can go ahead and release my music directly to Spotify. Can you imagine if we would have had some of the stuff that kids have now when we would have had our, the ability to make music far easier. We were doing stuff, it was literally on tape, I was living in Boston, so this is probably like 90, I want to say like 95, 96. I'm recording on 4-track. That was it. And yeah, you could do a digital conversion or whatever, but now kids can have an entire studio, not even an iPad, on an iPhone.
Yeah.
And record entire records, and that's exactly what they're doing. That's because the record industry is terrible. Just kind of an aside, just the nature of music. Apparently, the independent music charts, and I didn't know this until recently, to be an independent charting artist, you just can't be a part of the big three, which is like Warner and like whatever the three are.
Mhm.
So that means if you're on Disney, for God's sake, Encanto is the number one independent record, which means that even the concept of independent is so different now. But a complete digression. But gosh, I wish I had some of these things. I mean, we were fortunate, even later on where Pro Tools even became a thing. Now it's just unbelievable, the technology.
Yeah, I agree. Even going back to what we were talking about before, I remember, growing up, I'd grab my records and, play my records. And, a lot of times it'd be like the flip side, like the B side of, whoever heard of that that single before. There's a lot of the B sides that I like better than I'll give you an example. Ready? Oh my God, I'm going to say this out loud, but Rick Springfield,
Yeah.
when he had, I think it was I Get Excited, which was the big hit. If you flipped it over, I think it was Christina. Christina is still my favorite Rick Springfield song of all. I love Christina.
I don't know that I know it, so I'm gonna have to go listen.
Oh, you would. He still plays it. Actually, my wife and I, we saw him in Kansas. My wife had a convention she had to go to in Kansas City, so I ended up, just kind of tagging along. Lo and behold, Rick Springfield's playing there, and of course, the last song he played was Christina. Of course, all the hits, but I was like, all right, this is good band. Everything was great. But when he got into Christina, I was like, oh my God.
And he ended with it?
He ended with it, yeah.
So that means it's such a good tune that it's become a staple of his set, yet the stupid record label released something else as the single.
Yeah.
See, that's mind-blowing. It's just absolutely mind-blowing, and it just shows the kind of like a corruption and how inept
I don't
like
think
his
it was
agents
the last song, but it was like towards the end, just like maybe just before Jesse's Girl or whatever. But it was, in a prime spot. It wasn't, and he played it. That was the whole thing. And he played it. Is it the question that he played it?
That's awesome. I kind of like Rick Springfield. I remember a few years back, he got a little bit of a boost again when Dave Grohl from Foo Fighters was doing that kind of documentary tour.
Oh yeah,
and he comes out and he's like, so I've been trying to keep this podcast clean, so I can't use like anything that Dave Grohl says. And he's like, Rick bleeping Springfield, do you know how awesome you are when you could just go ahead and play just like 3 chords? And Rick's like, it's 4 chords. You can play 4 chords of your most famous song, and people know, and all you have to do is play the 4. You don't even have to play the even for a second more, and everyone knows what your song is. That's pretty impressive. So, Jesse's Girl obviously being the big hit, but it was good to kind of see him get a resurgence because, he plays really well. Yeah. Like he's actually quite a good guitar player. He writes his own material, and so again, this is a very 80s thing. He's Dr. Noah whatever on General Hospital.
Noah Drake.
Noah Drake. Oh my gosh. At least he has a much more serious musical career than another General Hospital alum. John Stamos, occasional drummer for the Beach Boys.
Right.
Don't want to pick on him. No, this has been a fun conversation, Justin. So one of the things that we've mentioned in doing, and I don't want to give too much away, is that we could then get into just a rabbit hole of just the stuff that we played and the songs that we played, the bands that we really listened to at that time. But I think we're gonna have another special guest in a few weeks' time. So I just want to say, so you have a show coming up. Now, do you have more than one, or you guys just getting ready for the one?
We're getting ready for this one. It's going to be a big one. It's so the name of the band is Bad Dog, and the gentleman that we kept talking about earlier in the conversation was Don Horton, and Don and I have been together since we were really 6th grade, 11 years old, 10 years old, and here we are still playing, 30 something years later. we took some time off, for, we raised some kids and had a family, and we got back together. I don't know, geez, maybe about 8 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago. And the band we're in it's Bad Dog, and it's classic rock, but with a kind of a southern flair. Don was really into the Allman Brothers kind of thing, so we're gonna put a lot of those kind of tunes in there. But we're gonna prime spot at the Daffodil Festival. We're gonna be playing 6:45 to 8. So we're gonna have a prime spot on Saturday night just before if they have fireworks. They usually do. So hopefully they'll have the fireworks. So if anybody's around, definitely come and see us, and definitely appreciate any of the support we can get.
So if anyone who doesn't know, and all the people that we grew up with know exactly what the Daffodil Festival is, but I mentioned at the top of the show that Justin wrote a book on Hubbard Park. So the Daffodil Festival is an annual event that's held at Hubbard Park where all the daffodils come to bloom. Can you give us just a little quick history on the Daffodil Festival and how that came to be?
Well, yeah, sure. So the Daffodil Festival is it's the last weekend in April each year. Over the past 2 years, we haven't had it because of the obviously COVID. So this is going to be it's going to be a special one since we haven't had it in a few years. But historically, it starts way back in the late 1940s. There was a superintendent of Meriden's public Parks and Rec. Was a gentleman named actually Parks. It wasn't a rec yet. His name was James Berry. And James Berry was kind of this cool figure. Well, he got a knock on the door one day, and it was this salesman from Holland. Now, this is a cool story because Holland was hit pretty hard during World War II. And when it was hit pretty hard in World War II, the Germans pretty much took over everything, commandeered like the food. It just took everything. And so they needed to make a living, and they didn't have any, money. All they had was this import or this export of flowers. So they started eating the daffodils because they didn't have enough nourishment.
Wow.
Well, they got sick on the daffodils. So they tried eating the tulips, and they actually sustained on the tulips. This is a true story. So they had to sell these extra daffodils. So they actually came over to the United States, and they had these salesmen going up and down the East Coast selling these extra daffodils. They needed to make money. They needed a way to make some money. So long story short, James Berry gets a knock on the door. It's one of these salesmen. And he's like, hey, you want to buy some of these daffodils, don't you? And James Berry's like, why? Why do I want these daffodils? So he bought a handful of them, and he just threw them once the guy left, threw them in the woods. And that was it. Well, sure enough, the spring bloom, it looks beautiful.
Yeah.
Gets back on the phone. Hey, I want some more of these daffodils next year. And that's so ever since the late 40s, we've had this beautiful bloom of daffodils. We had a daffodil day in 1953, I believe, but it wasn't until 1979 where it was a full-fledged. We had an expo in Meriden, which took place downtown, but it just grew and grew and grew, and it got too big for itself. So they needed to bring it somewhere, and they needed some kind of spark and some kind of bigger avenue to have these celebrations. So that's where the Daffodil comes in. The Daffodil Festival comes in.
So you may or may not know this, but so the second to last time I sang in Connecticut was at the Daffodil Festival.
Really?
In the food tent and karaoke. And I did Bon Jovi's Dead or Alive in the food tent. And
really?
Yeah, that was my time singing at the Daffodil Festival. The last time I actually sang in Connecticut was my sister Sam's graduation when she graduated from college. Jeff. So Jeff and I did a little set there. So there's two songs that haunt me, Justin. It's Whitesnake, Here I Go Again, and Sugar We're Going Down by Fall Out Boy. Those two songs have vanquished me. So one of these days, I'm going to get myself some Pro Tools and Auto-Tune. Those two songs, I just have to perform live someday, someplace, and get them right. I'll never do Coverdale like Coverdale, but damn it, I can do that Fall Out Boy song.
Redemption is great.
It always feels good. It's like self-revenge.
Speaking of Jeff, did I ever tell you this story? So when I was doing the research for the book, I'd go up there every week, you know, or every week, and I go for this long walk all through the trails and everything. I got talking to a gentleman. Was it his wife? No, it was just a gentleman. I'm walking down. I probably